So I just demoed Pragmata and I have some thoughts about it and its potential to craft an interesting narrative around AI. I stumbled into this little IGN article where the devs for the game say the story was hammered out before the surge of AI usage, and they kind of lament that they couldn't incorporate a lot of the concepts they were seeing in real life into the game, which got me wondering what concepts were they thinking of as they wrote the story. Because Pragmata as a game so far has been interesting in what it conveys with the design of our two characters, not only physically but mechanically. The premise is that you have this spaceman and an android facing off against a rogue AI that has taken over, I think, a moon colony in particular. And from the character design and action alone, you have a pretty clear understanding that they're probably going to make you think about the validity of android sentience or sapience if you're a Star Trek fan. The opening demo scene shows our girl Diana, perhaps named after the goddess of the hunt, singing to herself in no hurry to follow a directive and drawing a picture. Essentially, she's being a kid, and everything about her conveys the vulnerability of a child. Her hair is long and falls over her face. She wears a spacesuit that practically swallows her. She has bare hands and feet, showing a kind of helplessness, and rides around on your shoulder like a little sister. And this cute little girl is the android, but she's also your heavy hitter. In gameplay, she's characterized different than the way most children would be in certain games, where usually because you're smaller, they'll put you in more passive things that, like, a child can sneak under a door and help you make progress by accessing things that you as an adult cannot. They usually have the more passive abilities while the adult in the room is handling the heavy machinery. But what I find incredibly interesting is that she is important to progressing by, yes, opening locked doors and moving platforms, but she's also your most efficient method of crushing enemies with big damage. Your gun might as well be a pea shooter without her help. She is absolutely carrying this team, and it's funny to read the interviews because from what I see, they were aiming for cute and likable and something you would want to protect. They were gonna go with a talking dog, and then they just landed on the idea of a child, and now we have this cute little big-eyed adorable kid shell housing what is essentially a war machine. And the human character, by contrast, is kind of useless. Hugh, our human, is this guy in a big, heavy spacesuit who moves like he weighs 600 pounds and has his face obscured by his helmet. His first action in this cutscene is fighting the robots, but contrary to what you might think, where he might serve as the function of a protector, he literally does not have the power to make much of a dent without wasting a lot of time or bullets. It doesn't take more than a handful of bullets before you realize how slow and squishy this man is, and it gets harder and harder to conceivably imagine that he could be cutting his way through this moon station on his own without getting obliterated. But obviously, his character design isn't saying that. You're bulky, you're faceless, you're the tank, you should be the heavy hitter. This guy is not designed to look vulnerable, but if I had to take a bet on who would survive locked in a room with this big robot, my bets would be on the child. And I like that. I like looking at this picture of marketing material and feeling slightly deceived because my guess when I heard that this was a story about an android and a human was that this was going to be a little girl and her robot story with no other context. And obviously, a little girl innocent android has been done before, but what's interesting to me is the potential for this contrast to be explored. For a human being to be in a more robotic shell than the robot, and also more vulnerable than the robot. There's also the potential to explore the idea of free will and human connection or thought and how that will be portrayed when the antagonist is an AI program that took over a space station. And your major character beats between Diana and Hugh have been a high five, and Diana showing the picture she made of you both with crayons. You know, you have like these two highlighted moments of connection, and I think a big question that was coming to mind immediately is how legitimate is that connection? With the recent boom in generative AI and it being used to replace human interaction in the most extreme cases, to the point that we have the armchair term AI psychosis for people who cannot or refuse to distinguish the difference between a machine executing a response to a series of inputs, a la Chinese room scenario, versus a living being with its own motives and ability to apply critical thought responding to you, we have an incredibly interesting real-life basis to explore these aspects through fiction. Having an android that is designed to be likable on a meta level and probably on a diegetic level is interesting because you have so many avenues to possibly explore. And we've seen various takes on that idea from Clara and the Sun, Blade Runner, iRobot, or Ghost in the Shell, to name a few. What comes to mind most prominently for me at the moment is the Aliens franchise, since it seems to adore exploring the idea of machine life and its relationship to humans. A big focus in the Aliens franchise is how an android's behavior can be interpreted as either a manifestation of sapience or simply a matter of programming, and a human's complicated relationship with the machine comes from a human reaction to something inhuman in a sense. To see that idea of the interpretation of an android's behavior explored maybe a little in this game would be interesting. This might end up being a straightforward man and his little girl daughter video game kind of story, and we may just get a game that ends with the idea of protect the small because the small is innocent and valid life. But I would hope for these guys who seem to be at least a little interested in conversations around the AI boom around us now to have had an inclination to go to more complicated places when they were developing this story. Is an android drawing a picture of herself and her human companion like a child because that's really the best she can draw to express herself? Or does she draw the subject that way because that's how an android programmed to behave like a child endears themselves to humans as a part of her programming? Do we ever look deeper than the shell? I don't know, but I'd like to find out.